Some people do not enter your life to understand you. They enter your life to discover how much access you will give them. They study your compassion. They observe your insecurities. They test your boundaries. And when they discover that you are willing to abandon yourself to keep the relationship alive, they begin to use your kindness as permission. But today, you are going to understand something powerful. Narcissism does not maintain control through strength alone. It maintains control through confusion. The moment you understand the pattern begins to lose its power. You are not here to become bitter. You are not here to become suspicious of everyone. You are here to develop emotional intelligence. You are here to recognize unhealthy patterns without losing your humanity. You are here to learn how to love people without surrendering your identity, because understanding psychology is not about judging people. It is about becoming wise enough to protect your purpose. What looks like excessive confidence is not always confidence at all. Sometimes it is protection. Sometimes it is a carefully built image designed to cover a deep fear of being ordinary, rejected, criticized, or exposed. A person may speak as though they are always right, behave as though they deserve special treatment, and demand constant recognition from others. Yet beneath that presentation, there may be a fragile sense of identity that depends heavily on admiration. True confidence is stable. It does not need to prove itself in every conversation. It does not need to embarrass other people in order to feel important. It does not collapse when someone offers correction. A truly confident person can listen, reflect, admit a mistake, and still maintain a healthy sense of worth. But when a person's self-image is fragile, even small criticism can feel like a serious threat. This is why some individuals react with unusual anger, defensiveness, blame, or withdrawal when they are questioned. The issue may appear small to everyone else, but to them, it touches something deeper. They may feel that their value, intelligence, authority, or reputation is being challenged. Instead of examining the feedback, they may attack the person who gave it. You must understand this distinction because appearance can deceive you. Loudness is not always strength. Control is not always leadership. Arrogance is not always self-belief. Sometimes these behaviors are attempts to hide internal instability. A person who does not feel secure within may try to create security by controlling the environment around them. They may need everyone to agree. They may expect constant praise. They may become uncomfortable when another person receives attention. They may exaggerate their achievements or reduce the value of others in order to maintain a feeling of superiority. But superiority is not the same as self-worth. Healthy self-worth says, I have value, and so do you. Narcissistic thinking may say, I can only feel valuable when I appear more important than you. That difference affects every relationship. When someone builds their identity on being superior, relationships become competitive. They may struggle to celebrate another person's success because someone else's achievement feels like a reduction of their own importance. Instead of being inspired, they feel threatened. Instead of supporting, they may criticize, dismiss, or redirect attention back to themselves. This behavior can be confusing because the person may appear confident in public while being deeply sensitive in private. They may enjoy praise but react strongly to disagreement. They may demand honesty from others while refusing honest feedback about themselves. They may present themselves as powerful, yet require constant reassurance. The lesson is not to mock their insecurity. The lesson is to recognize the pattern so that you do not become controlled by it. Compassion may help you understand why a person behaves this way, but compassion should never require you to tolerate repeated harm. You can recognize that someone may carry deep emotional wounds while still holding them responsible for their behavior. A difficult past may explain certain actions, but it does not automatically excuse them. Many people make the mistake of believing that enough love, patience, praise, or sacrifice will heal another person's insecurity. They keep giving more, hoping the person will finally feel safe enough to change. But internal insecurity cannot be permanently repaired through external admiration. No amount of praise is enough when a person has not developed a stable identity. You may reassure them today, but they may demand more reassurance tomorrow. You may sacrifice your needs to keep them calm, but eventually another demand appears. You may constantly prove your loyalty, yet one disagreement may cause them to question everything. This is because external validation produces temporary relief, not lasting security. A healthy identity must be developed internally through self-awareness, accountability, humility, emotional maturity, and honest personal growth. Nobody else can complete that work for another person. You must also be careful not to lose yourself while trying to stabilize someone who refuses to stabilize themselves. When you constantly manage another person's emotions, you may stop listening to your own. When you constantly protect their self-image, you may begin hiding your truth. When you constantly avoid upsetting them, you may slowly surrender your voice. That is not peace. That is emotional imbalance. Real peace does not require one person to remain silent so another person can remain comfortable. Real connection allows truth, respect, correction, and accountability to exist together. You should be able to express concern without being punished. You should be able to disagree without being humiliated. You should be able to establish a boundary without being accused of betrayal. The psychology behind narcissistic behavior may be complex, but your response can remain clear. Do not become obsessed with proving that another person is insecure. Do not use psychological knowledge as a weapon. Do not attempt to expose, embarrass, or defeat them. Instead, use understanding to make wiser decisions. Observe how they respond to correction. Watch whether they accept responsibility. Notice whether they respect your independence. Pay attention to whether they can celebrate your growth without feeling threatened. Patterns reveal more than promises. And most importantly, strengthen your own identity. When you know your worth, you do not need to argue with every false accusation. When you understand your values, you do not need constant approval. When your identity is secure, another person's arrogance cannot make you feel small. The goal is not to become superior to them. The goal is to become stable within yourself. Build confidence that does not depend on attention. Develop humility that allows correction. Create self-worth that does not require comparison. Practice emotional discipline so that manipulation cannot easily control your reactions. Because the strongest person is not the one who demands admiration. The strongest person is the one who can live with dignity, accept truth, respect others, and remain secure without needing to dominate anyone. Narcissistic patterns are often sustained by a constant hunger for external validation. This means the person depends heavily on praise, attention, admiration, approval, status, or emotional reactions from others to maintain their sense of importance. Their confidence may appear strong, but it is often controlled by the response of the people around them. When they are admired, they may seem charming, generous, energetic, and confident, but when the admiration decreases, their behavior can suddenly change. They may become defensive, distant, critical, resentful, or controlling because the attention they relied upon is no longer feeding the image they created. You must understand that healthy self-worth is developed from within. It is built through character, responsibility, self-knowledge, discipline, and personal integrity. A healthy person appreciates praise, but does not depend on it to know their value. They can enter a room without needing to dominate it. They can listen to someone else's success without feeling threatened. They can receive correction without believing their entire identity is under attack. But when someone's identity depends completely on external validation, another person's success can feel like their failure. Someone else receiving attention may feel like rejection. A disagreement may feel like disrespect. A boundary may feel like betrayal. This is why narcissistic behavior can create constant competition, even inside relationships that should be based on cooperation. You may notice that every conversation must return to them. Every achievement must somehow include them. Every problem must become larger when it affects them. If you share good news, they may immediately compare it to something they accomplished. If you express pain, they may redirect the discussion toward their own suffering. If someone else receives praise, they may criticize that person, minimize the achievement, or find a way to regain the spotlight. This does not always mean the person is consciously planning every reaction. Some patterns become automatic because they have been practiced for years. But whether the behavior is intentional or unconscious, the impact on others can still be harmful. People around them may begin shrinking themselves to keep the peace. They stop celebrating their victories. They hide opportunities. They reduce their confidence. They carefully choose their words because they do not want to trigger jealousy, anger, or withdrawal. Slowly, the relationship becomes organized around protecting one person's fragile ego. Listen carefully. You should never have to become smaller to make another person feel bigger. Healthy love celebrates growth. Healthy friendship welcomes success. Healthy leadership develops other people rather than feeling threatened by their potential. When someone truly knows their own value, they do not need to steal attention from another person. They understand that another person's light does not reduce their own. External validation can also become a tool of control. A person may reward you with affection, compliments, attention, or approval when you behave the way they want. Then they may withdraw that approval when you question them, disagree with them, or establish a boundary. This creates emotional confusion. You begin working harder to regain the version of them that once made you feel special. You may ask yourself, what did I do wrong? How can I make them treat me warmly again? Without realizing it, you become trapped in a cycle of earning affection that should never have been used as a reward. This pattern teaches you to chase approval rather than examine behavior. Instead of asking whether the relationship is healthy, you ask how to avoid disappointing the other person. Instead of expressing your needs, you study their moods. Instead of living from your values, you begin living according to their reactions. That is why your healing must include freedom from excessive approval seeking. You must learn to say, I appreciate encouragement, but I do not need permission to respect myself. Your worth cannot rise when someone praises you and fall when someone criticizes you. Your identity cannot be controlled by attention. Your peace cannot depend on whether another person is pleased with your boundaries. You must become emotionally grounded. This does not mean you stop listening to feedback. Wise people remain teachable. It means you evaluate feedback based on truth, not fear. You ask whether the criticism is honest, specific, and constructive. You do not automatically accept every accusation simply because it is delivered with confidence or anger. There is great power in knowing who you are. When you know your values, flattery cannot easily manipulate you. When you know your weaknesses, criticism cannot easily destroy you. When you know your purpose, attention cannot easily distract you. And when you know your worth, withdrawal cannot easily control you. Do not spend your life trying to satisfy someone whose need for validation has no finish line. You may give more praise, more patience, more sacrifice, and more reassurance, yet still discover that it is never enough. That is because no amount of external admiration can permanently repair an identity that has never learned internal stability. You are not responsible for becoming another person's endless source of emotional fuel. You can encourage people without worshiping them. You can love people without surrendering your voice. You can show compassion without participating in unhealthy cycles. You can acknowledge someone's strengths without pretending they are never wrong. Your responsibility is to remain truthful. Develop a life that is not controlled by applause. Build confidence through discipline. Build dignity through character. Build emotional strength through self-awareness. Let your identity be rooted in principles that remain stable when attention disappears. Because the person who requires constant admiration will always be controlled by the crowd. But the person who knows their purpose can remain steady in silence. Do not chase attention. Build substance. Do not live for approval. Live by conviction. Do not measure your worth by how many people admire you. Measure your growth by how honestly, responsibly, and courageously you live. The strongest identity is not the one that receives the loudest praise. It is the one that remains whole when nobody is clapping. One of the clearest psychological patterns in narcissistic behavior is the replacement of genuine connection with control. A healthy relationship allows two people to exist as complete individuals. Both people have opinions, needs, emotions, boundaries, ambitions, and the freedom to grow. But when control becomes the foundation of a relationship, equality begins to disappear. One person slowly becomes the center, while the other is expected to adjust, obey, explain, forgive, and sacrifice. Control does not always arrive through shouting or obvious aggression. Sometimes it arrives through charm. Sometimes it appears as intense attention, constant compliments, dramatic promises, or the feeling that you have finally met someone who understands you completely. The connection may move quickly because speed can prevent careful observation. When you are emotionally overwhelmed by admiration, you may not notice the early signs of possessiveness, entitlement, or disrespect. Over time, the relationship may begin to change. The praise becomes criticism. The affection becomes conditional. The attention that once made you feel special may now be withdrawn whenever you disagree. You may discover that peace is available only when you cooperate, and conflict appears whenever you express independence. This is how control can disguise itself as love. Love says, "I respect your freedom." Control says, "Your freedom threatens me." Love allows honest disagreement. Control treats disagreement as disloyalty. Love wants you to become stronger. Control benefits when you become uncertain. When someone depends on control to feel secure, your independence may be interpreted as rejection. Your friendships may be treated as competition. Your private time may be seen as secrecy. Your boundaries may be called selfishness. Your achievements may be minimized because your confidence makes you harder to dominate. This is why it is important to recognize that not every demand for closeness is an expression of love. Sometimes the demand is about access. The person may want unlimited access to your time, attention, emotions, resources, and decisions. They may expect you to be constantly available while giving you very little emotional security in return. A relationship becomes unhealthy when one person is valued mainly for what they provide. You may be appreciated when you agree, praise, comfort, solve problems, offer money, protect an image, or tolerate poor behavior. But when you need support, honesty, or accountability, the relationship suddenly becomes difficult. That is not mutual connection. That is emotional consumption. You must learn to separate being needed from being valued. A person can need what you provide without respecting who you are. They can depend on your kindness while criticizing your character. They can benefit from your loyalty while refusing to offer loyalty in return. Do not measure the health of a relationship only by how strongly someone reacts when you leave. Measure it by how responsibly they treated you when you stayed. Control also survives through confusion. When the rules of the relationship constantly change, you may spend all your energy trying to avoid conflict. What was acceptable yesterday may become offensive today. A boundary that was respected in one moment may be mocked in the next. You may begin monitoring every word, facial expression, and decision because you never know what will trigger a negative response. This emotional uncertainty can weaken your confidence. You stop asking what is fair and begin asking what will keep the other person calm. You stop expressing your needs and begin managing their moods. You stop living as yourself and begin performing a version of yourself that feels safer. But you were not created to become an emotional servant in another person's private kingdom. You are responsible for your behavior, but you are not responsible for controlling another adult's emotions. You can communicate respectfully. You can show compassion. You can listen carefully. But you cannot surrender your identity to prevent someone from becoming upset. Healthy connection requires accountability from both sides. Both people must be able to apologize. Both people must respect boundaries. Both people must accept that love does not provide permission to dominate. The answer is not revenge, manipulation, or cruelty. The answer is clarity. Observe patterns instead of becoming distracted by promises. Pay attention to consistency instead of intensity. Ask whether your voice is welcomed or merely tolerated. Ask whether your growth is celebrated or quietly punished. Your purpose is not to control the controller. Your purpose is to regain control of yourself. Control your access. Control your responses. Control your decisions. Control what behavior you continue to participate in. The moment you stop surrendering your choices, unhealthy control begins to lose its power. Real love does not require you to disappear. Real connection does not demand that one person shrink so another person can feel superior. You deserve relationships where respect is mutual, freedom is protected, communication is honest, and both people are allowed to grow. Awareness and boundaries are more powerful than revenge because revenge keeps your life emotionally connected to the very person you are trying to escape. When someone has manipulated, controlled, embarrassed, dismissed, or emotionally exhausted you, the natural temptation may be to make them feel what you felt. You may want them to regret losing you. You may want to expose them, defeat them, or prove that they no longer have power over you. But the moment your peace depends on their suffering, they are still controlling you. They may no longer control your actions directly, but they are still occupying your mind, influencing your decisions, and determining where your emotional energy goes. Real freedom begins when you stop making another person the center of your healing. You do not overcome unhealthy behavior by becoming equally manipulative. You do not defeat dishonesty by becoming dishonest. You do not protect your dignity by abandoning your character. Your greatest victory is not making someone suffer. Your greatest victory is becoming so emotionally stable that their behavior can no longer govern your future. Awareness gives you the ability to recognize patterns without becoming trapped inside them. It teaches you to observe actions instead of being hypnotized by promises. It helps you understand that charm is not always character, attention is not always affection, and an apology is not always transformation. Some people apologize because they have changed. Others apologize because they fear losing access. Wisdom teaches you to examine what happens after the words are spoken. Does the behavior improve? Is responsibility accepted? Are your boundaries respected? Is empathy demonstrated consistently? Real change is not measured by emotional speeches. It is measured by sustained behavior. When you become aware, you stop arguing with repeated evidence. You stop creating excuses for patterns that continue to injure you. You stop believing that your kindness can rescue someone who refuses accountability. Compassion remains part of your character, but it is no longer used against you. A boundary is not an act of hatred. It is an act of responsibility. It is the decision to protect what has been entrusted to you, your peace, your time, your mind, your body, your resources, and your purpose. A boundary does not mean you're trying to control another person. It means you have decided what you will do when unhealthy behavior occurs. You cannot force another person to stop shouting, but you can end the conversation when shouting begins. You cannot force someone to become honest, but you can stop trusting important decisions to inconsistent words. You cannot force someone to respect your time, but you can stop rearranging your entire life for someone who repeatedly ignores your needs. You cannot force accountability, but you can refuse to remain in situations where blame, denial, and confusion are constantly used to avoid responsibility. This is where many people become stuck. They think setting a boundary means explaining it repeatedly until the other person agrees. But a boundary does not require agreement. It requires consistency. You may say, "I will not continue this conversation while I am being insulted." The power is not in the sentence alone. The power is in leaving the conversation when the insult continues. You may say, "I need honesty in this relationship." But if dishonesty continues without consequences, your words become suggestions rather than boundaries. Never announce a limit you are unwilling to enforce. When your actions contradict your words, unhealthy people learn that your boundaries can be negotiated through pressure, guilt, anger, tears, or temporary affection. You must become clear. Clarity is not cruelty. Distance is not always hatred. Silence is not always weakness. Sometimes silence is emotional discipline. Sometimes distance is protection. Sometimes ending a conversation is the healthiest response available. You are not required to attend every argument you are invited into. You are not required to defend yourself against every accusation. You are not required to explain your decisions to someone who repeatedly twists your explanations. There are moments when the strongest response is no longer participating in the cycle. This does not mean you become cold or heartless. It means you stop confusing compassion with unlimited access. You can care about someone and still recognize that their presence is damaging your well-being. You can forgive someone and still decide that closeness is no longer wise. You can understand their wounds without volunteering to become the place where those wounds are repeatedly expressed through harm. Understanding another person's pain does not require you to accept their mistreatment. Your life has purpose. Your mind has value. Your time is limited. You cannot spend your entire future recovering from the same behavior simply because you are afraid of being called selfish. Some people will criticize your boundaries because they benefited from your lack of them. They may call you difficult when you stop being easily controlled. They may call you uncaring when you stop sacrificing yourself. They may accuse you of changing because the older version of you was easier to manipulate. Let them notice the change. Growth should change your decisions. Healing should change your standards. Wisdom should change who receives access to you. Your responsibility is not to convince everyone that your boundary is reasonable. Your responsibility is to make sure your life remains aligned with your values. Do not seek revenge. Seek restoration. Restore your confidence. Restore your discipline. Restore your relationships with trustworthy people. Restore your focus on your goals. Restore the parts of yourself that became neglected while you were trying to manage someone else's behavior. The greatest response to manipulation is clarity. The greatest response to control is self-government. The greatest response to disrespect is a standard you are willing to protect. The greatest response to emotional chaos is a disciplined mind. You do not win by destroying another person. You win by refusing to let their dysfunction destroy the person you were created to become. Rise above the need to prove a point. Rise above the desire to cause regret. Let your healing speak. Let your consistency speak. Let your peaceful life speak. The moment you no longer need their apology to move forward, you become free. The moment you no longer need their understanding to trust your own experience, you become strong. The moment you stop fighting for permission to protect yourself, you become responsible for your future. Awareness gives you sight. Boundaries give you structure. Discipline gives you strength. Purpose gives you direction. And when those four qualities begin working together, unhealthy patterns lose their authority over your life.